Be Me Hadley. Not my real name, but close enough. 29. At the time this all started, maybe 30, team lead at a respectable, if boring, tech company. You know the type. Corporate carpets, free lukewarm coffee, and endless meetings about synergy. I was ambitious. I wasn't just there to climb the ladder. I was there to fix the ladder, paint it a new color, and make sure everyone climbed it the right way. My way. For years, I'd been reading, listening, absorbing. I saw the tech world for what it was, a boys' club, a place where loud, aggressive men dominated every conversation and took credit for the quiet, brilliant work of women. I saw the subtle put-downs, the, well, actuallys, the way a woman's idea would be ignored until a man repeated it 5 minutes later. It was a subtle poison, and I was the antidote. When I got promoted to team lead, I saw my chance. This wasn't just a team. It was a laboratory. I was going to create a perfect, equitable, productive utopia. A space where female voices were not just heard, but amplified. My team was a pretty standard mix. A few women, a few more men. Among them was Michael. Michael was a problem. Not in the way you'd think. He wasn't loud or disruptive. He didn't cause drama. That was the issue. He did nothing. He was a senior developer, probably in his late 30s. Highly competent, everyone knew that. His code was clean, efficient, and always on time. But he was a ghost, a phantom in a polo shirt. He'd come in, put on his headphones, code for 8 hours, and leave. In meetings, he was a black hole of enthusiasm. He'd sit there, hands folded on the table, with a completely neutral expression. He never offered an idea unless directly asked. He never challenged anything. He never got excited. It drove me insane. To me, this wasn't just a quiet personality. It was a political statement. It was the distilled essence of male fragility, a silent, passive-aggressive protest against having a woman in charge. He was the patient zero of the toxicity I was trying to cure. The first thing I implemented was a strict no interruptions policy, aimed squarely at what I called manterrupting. We had our first big team meeting under my new leadership. One of the junior women, Renata, was presenting an idea. She was new, a little nervous, but smart. I saw a lot of potential in her. She was explaining a concept, and one of the other male devs, a decent guy but a bit of a talker, jumped in with a technical question. I held up my hand immediately. Let's let Renata finish her thought completely. It's important we give each speaker the floor. The guy blinked, mumbled an apology, and sat back. The room went quiet. A little too quiet. I glanced at Michael. Nothing. Not a flicker of emotion. He was just watching, like a person watching a documentary about deep-sea fish. Renata finished her pitch. It was a good idea, maybe a little rough around the edges. I praised her effusively. Excellent thinking, Renata. That's the kind of fresh perspective we need. Then I opened the floor. Any thoughts? Constructive feedback only, please. The silence was heavy. The men looked at their notebooks or their hands. Finally, after an awkward beat, one of them said, "Yeah, sounds good." That was it. My equitable utopia felt less like a vibrant discussion and more like a funeral. But I told myself it was just growing pains. They were learning the new rules. They were adapting. I started making Renata my project, my protégée. I'd have coffee with her, mentor her, encourage her to speak up. Your voice is just as important as anyone else's in that room, I'd tell her. More so, even. You're not saddled with the old, broken ways of thinking. She soaked it up. She started getting more confident, more vocal in meetings, and every time she spoke, I made sure she was the center of attention. If a man proposed an idea, I'd often turn to her and ask, "Renata, what's a woman's perspective on this?" It sounds clumsy now, but at the time, it felt revolutionary. Meanwhile, my Michael problem wasn't getting any better. I scheduled a one-on-one with him. I wanted to get to the bottom of his apathy. He sat in the chair opposite my desk, perfectly still. I started with the usual manager speak. Just wanted to check in, see how you're feeling about the team's new direction. He gave a slight nod. It's fine. The directives are clear. Right, I said, trying a different angle. I've been looking at your work, and your output is excellent. The code is flawless, but I feel like we're not getting the full Michael experience. I smiled, trying to be charming. It didn't land. What I mean is, you have so much experience. We need that experience in our planning sessions. We need your voice, your ideas. He looked at me, and for the first time, I felt like he was actually seeing me. There was no anger, no resentment, just a profound, soul-crushing weariness. He said, "My job is to write code according to the specifications provided in the ticket. I do that to the best of my ability. If you have a specific question about a technical implementation, I'm happy to answer it." He delivered the line like a lawyer reading a contract. It was a perfectly constructed wall. There was no way in. I pressed on, my frustration growing. But it's more than that. It's about passion, about ownership. We're a team, not a factory line. I understand, he said, the words utterly devoid of understanding. Is there anything else? I have a task I need to complete before the end of the day. I deflated. No, Michael, that's all. He stood up, gave another tiny nod, and left. I stared at the door he'd closed behind him. This was worse than I thought. This wasn't passive aggression. This was a man who had completely checked out. A man who had been so coddled by the patriarchy that the moment he was asked for a shred of emotional engagement, he shut down. He was a symptom of the disease. And I was going to cure it, whether he liked it or not. Sometime in the late spring, the big news came down from on high. Project Odyssey. It was a complete ground-up rebuild of our company's flagship product, a legacy system that was clunky and outdated, holding the business back. This was a career-making project. The team that pulled this off would be legendary, and it was given to us, to my team. My boss told me, "This is a big vote of confidence in you, Hadley. Don't mess it up." I was ecstatic. This was it. My chance to prove that my methods weren't just about feelings and fairness. They were about results. We'd build a better product because we had a better, healthier, more inclusive culture. I called a big kickoff meeting. I laid out the vision. I talked about collaboration, about safe spaces for ideas, about building something that would define the next decade of the company's history. And leading the architectural vision for this, I announced, beaming, will be Renata. A murmur went through the room. Renata was smart, but she'd been at the company for less than a year. Appointing her over senior devs like Michael was a statement, and I meant to make it. Renata herself looked shocked, but pleased. She shot me a grateful look. The men on the team clapped politely, their faces unreadable. Michael just blinked, slowly. The planning phase began. It was difficult. Renata was full of ideas, all of them based on the latest, trendiest technologies she'd read about on tech blogs. Microservices, serverless functions, a dozen different JavaScript frameworks. It was a beautiful, complex, and fashionable architecture. The other women on the team were enthusiastic, building on her ideas, sketching out diagrams on the whiteboard. The men were quiet. They mostly listened. During one of the key architectural reviews, we were discussing the database structure. Renata was proposing a highly complex, non-relational model. It was the in thing to do. And then it happened. Michael raised his hand. It was so unusual that the entire room went silent and stared at him. I almost didn't know how to react. "Yes, Michael?" I said, trying to keep the surprise out of my voice. He stood up and walked to the whiteboard. He didn't look at me or Renata. He looked at the diagram. "This approach," he began, his voice flat and even, will create significant data integrity issues down the line. The kind of transactional consistency our application requires is fundamentally at odds with this model. He picked up a marker. Furthermore, the projected query load during peak hours will create bottlenecks here, here, and here. He circled 3 different parts of the diagram. The amount of engineering effort required to mitigate these inherent flaws will double the projected timeline of the project. He then sketched out a simpler, more traditional architecture, a relational database, a more monolithic backend. It wasn't sexy. It was sturdy. It was boring. This, he said, tapping his diagram, is less exciting, but it's reliable, scalable, and will handle our specific use case without falling over. It can be built in half the time. He put the marker down and returned to his seat. The silence in the room was absolute. He hadn't been emotional. He hadn't been aggressive. He had just laid out cold, hard, technical facts. But I didn't see it that way. I saw a man, the embodiment of the old guard, publicly trying to tear down the innovative idea of a junior woman. I saw him trying to maintain the status quo, to cling to the old, comfortable ways of doing things. It was a power play, disguised as a technical argument. I smiled, a tight, forced smile. Thank you, Michael, for that. Perspective. It's always valuable to understand the traditional approach. However, the goal of Project Odyssey is to be forward-thinking. We're not here to build what's easy. We're here to build what's next. I turned to Renata, who looked a little shaken. Renata, your vision is exactly what this project needs. Let's move forward with your design. I had made my decision. I had backed my protégé. I had stared down the old guard. I felt powerful, vindicated. I glanced over at Michael. He wasn't angry. He wasn't smug. He wasn't anything. He just picked up his pen, made a small note in his book, and then looked back up at the whiteboard, his face a perfect, placid mask. He had tried. He had spoken up. And he had been dismissed. That was the last time Michael ever offered an unsolicited opinion in a meeting. In the weeks that followed, a strange quiet fell over the male half of the team. It was a shift so subtle I barely noticed it at first. They became perfect employees. They arrived at 9 a.m. on the dot. They left at 5 p.m. on the dot. Their tickets were completed exactly as written. If a task description was ambiguous, they wouldn't ask for clarification. They would implement the ambiguity literally. If a design from Renata's team had an obvious flaw, they wouldn't point it out. They would code the flaw perfectly. They never missed a deadline. They never complained. They never helped each other unless a ticket was created specifically for it. The casual chatter in the team's chat channel died. The jokes, the shared articles, the after-work drinks invites, all gone. The office became a library, a silent, sterile place of pure, unadulterated work. At first, I thought it was a victory. Look, I told my boss during a check-in, no more drama, no more ego, just pure productivity. He nodded, but he looked skeptical. Productivity is good, Hadley, but innovation comes from friction, from debate. Are you sure you're not just hearing echoes? I dismissed his concerns as old-fashioned thinking. He just didn't get it. The first signs of trouble appeared about 2 months into development. We were doing our first major integration test, trying to get the different parts of Renata's grand architecture to talk to each other. It was a disaster. Nothing worked. Data was getting lost. Services were timing out. The exact kind of problems Michael had predicted. I called an emergency meeting. The mood was tense. Okay, I said, trying to sound calm and in control. Clearly, we have some integration challenges. Let's brainstorm. All ideas are good ideas. I looked around the room. Renata and the other women started throwing out suggestions. Complex workarounds, patches, middleware to bridge the gaps. They were solutions that added more complexity, not less. They were treating the symptoms, not the disease. I looked at the men, Michael, the others. They were silent. They just listened. "Michael," I said, singling him out, "you have the most experience with back-end systems. What are your thoughts?" He looked up from his notebook. "The services are not communicating because the data contracts are incompatible," he said, as if reading a weather report. "This is a direct result of the database model." He stated the problem. He did not offer a solution. "Okay," I said, waiting for more. "So, how do we fix it?" He met my gaze. The most efficient solution would be to refactor the database model. However, that would be a significant deviation from the approved architecture. He was telling me, in the most robotic way possible, that the entire foundation of our project was wrong. The foundation that I had approved, the one he had warned me about. A flash of anger went through me. He was enjoying this. He had to be. "A refactor is not an option at this stage," I said, my voice sharp. "We're past that. We need a solution, not a history lesson." "Understood," he said, and made another note in his book. He had done his duty. He had answered my question. The conversation, for him, was over. We spent the next 2 weeks in hell. The team worked late hours, fueled by pizza and my increasingly desperate motivational speeches. We cobbled together a series of ugly hacks and temporary fixes to force the system to work. We were no longer building a cathedral. We were patching up a shack in the middle of a hurricane. Renata was starting to look overwhelmed. The confident visionary I had mentored was being replaced by a stressed-out junior dev who was in way over her head. She started deflecting, blaming the lack of support from the senior developers. I defended her, of course. I told her the men were just resentful of her talent, that they were subtly sabotaging her. I believed it. It was easier than believing I had made a catastrophic mistake. As the project limped along, the behavior of the male developers became even more pronounced. They were practicing a form of malicious compliance. One time, Renata submitted a design document for a new feature. In one of the diagrams, she had accidentally swapped the labels for user ID and session ID. It was a simple typo. Anyone with a bit of experience would have seen it, pointed it out, and fixed it in 5 minutes. The task was assigned to one of the male devs. He built the entire feature with the labels swapped. It passed all the automated tests, because the tests were also written based on the flawed document. It wasn't until a week later, when we were trying to figure out why users were getting logged into other people's accounts, that we found the problem. I confronted the developer. "Why didn't you say anything? You knew this was wrong." He looked at me without a trace of guilt. "My task was to implement the feature as specified in the design document," he said. "I did that. The document was approved by you and Renata. I am not a QA analyst." I was speechless. He was technically correct. He had done his job. Nothing more, nothing less. He had followed the rules of the sterile, passionless world I had created, and that world was starting to crumble. The project manager, an external contractor, started raising red flags. He showed me the burn-down charts. We were falling catastrophically behind schedule. The bug count wasn't going down. It was growing exponentially. Every fix seemed to create 2 new problems. I called another big, late-night, all-hands-on-deck meeting. I bought pizza. I tried to be the cool, inspiring leader. "Okay, team," I said, trying to inject some energy into the room. "We're in the trenches now. This is where great teams are forged. I need everyone to dig deep. I need ideas. I need solutions. Let's whiteboard this until we have a path forward." I looked around the room, expecting something. Instead, I was met with a sea of tired, blank faces. The women offered a few half-hearted suggestions, rehashes of ideas that hadn't worked before. The men were silent. I started to feel a genuine sense of panic. "Come on, people, I need more. Cooper's team in marketing is waiting on our deliverables. The whole company is watching us." I was pleading. It was pathetic. I looked at Michael. He was just staring at the empty pizza boxes. "Michael, say something. Anything." He looked up, as if surprised to be addressed. "The current trajectory is unsustainable," he said. "The level of technical debt is exceeding the rate of feature completion. Statistically, the project is destined for failure." He said it with the same emotional investment as someone commenting on the weather. "Don't tell me it's going to fail," I snapped. "Tell me how to fix it." He just looked at me. "The time to fix it was during the architectural phase," he said softly. And then he looked at the clock on the wall. It was 6:01 p.m. He closed his laptop. "My workday is over," he said. Then, one by one, the other men on the team started packing up their bags. They didn't say a word to me or to each other. Within 2 minutes, they were all gone. I was left in the conference room with Renata and 2 other female developers, surrounded by cold pizza and the wreckage of my grand vision. That night, I didn't sleep. I just sat in the dark, replaying that moment in my head. The way they had just left. It wasn't a protest. It wasn't a mutiny. It was just the rules. The rules of a game I had invented, and I was losing badly. The week before the deadline was a blur of cold coffee and quiet desperation. I tried everything. I tried being the cool boss. I ordered inexpensive food, told everyone to expense their Uber rides home. No one stayed a minute past 5. I tried being the hard-ass boss. I sent a stern email about commitment and professional responsibility. It was read and ignored. I tried pleading. I cornered a couple of the junior male devs in the kitchen. I talked about teamwork, about how we were all in this together. They just nodded, said yep, and went back to their desks to quietly work on their assigned tickets. It was like trying to reason with a brick wall, a polite, productive, entirely unhelpful brick wall. I held a code review for a critical component Michael had just finished. The code was, as always, perfect. It did exactly what the flawed specification asked it to do. It was a masterpiece of engineering that solved the wrong problem. "Michael," I said, trying to keep my voice even, "this is going to cause a major bottleneck. You know that." He looked at his screen. "The implementation matches the ticket requirements." "But the requirements are wrong. We know they're wrong. Can't you just fix it? Do what needs to be done?" He turned his head and looked at me. There was no malice in his eyes, just a complete and total absence of interest. "If you want to change the scope of the work," he said, his voice a monotone drone, "please submit a new ticket with the updated requirements. It will need to be estimated and prioritized by management. I can probably start on it next sprint." Next sprint. The project was due in 3 days. He was quoting the corporate process book at me. My own rules? He wasn't being difficult. He was being a model employee in the system I had built. I felt a cold dread wash over me. I had taken a team of creative problem solvers and systematically lobotomized them. I had rewarded compliance over initiative, and this was the result. A team that would calmly and efficiently follow me right off a cliff. The day of the presentation arrived. It was a gray, overcast morning. The weather matched my mood. We were presenting to the chief technology officer and a handful of vice presidents. My boss was there, looking nervous. I stood at the podium, my hands shaking slightly. Renata was at the keyboard, ready to drive the demo. She gave me a weak, reassuring smile. It didn't help. I started my presentation. I used all the right buzzwords. Synergy, paradigm shift, next-generation architecture. The words felt hollow, like a language I didn't speak anymore. Then came the demo. The first screen loaded, slowly, painfully slowly. An awkward silence filled the boardroom as the loading spinner just spun. After what felt like an eternity, the dashboard appeared. Some of the data widgets were empty. Others showed error messages. "We're still optimizing the initial data load," I said quickly, my voice a little too high. It's faster with a warm cache." The CTO just stared, his face like a stone carving. Renata clicked on a core feature, the one we'd spent months building. The system hung for a second, then the screen went white. The white screen of death. Renata frantically clicked, trying to refresh. Nothing. The project manager, the contractor, cleared his throat. "It appears the back-end service is not responding," he said, stating the obvious. My boss sank a little lower in his chair. I felt 100 pairs of eyes on me. It was the most profound professional humiliation I had ever experienced. The demo was over. The project was dead. The CTO looked at me. He didn't look angry. He looked disappointed. "Hadley," he said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of a death sentence. "What happened?" Before I could answer, before I could fall on my sword and take responsibility, Renata spoke up. Her voice was shaky but clear. She sounded like a victim. I tried to raise concerns," she began, looking at the floor. I stared at her, confused. This wasn't what we had discussed. I felt like the development process was very rigid. She continued, gaining confidence. There wasn't a lot of psychological safety to question the core architectural decisions once they were made. She was talking about Michael's suggestion, the one I had shot down. My jaw dropped. The pressure to meet the timeline was so intense, she went on, now looking at the VPs with wide, earnest eyes. And the senior members of the team were not very supportive. It felt like they had already given up, which created a really toxic atmosphere for the rest of us who were trying so hard. She was using my words, my concepts, my ideology. She was using the weapons I had given her, and she was pointing them directly at my heart. She painted a picture of a heroic young innovator being crushed by a toxic, unsupportive environment created by an incompetent manager. Me. I looked around the room. I saw the narrative shift. I was no longer the ambitious young leader. I was the failed manager who had alienated her team and destroyed a multi-million-dollar project. Renata was the victim, the hero, the one who had survived. It was a masterpiece of betrayal. So swift, so complete, I couldn't even mount a defense. Anything I said would just sound like I was blaming my team. Like I was the toxic manager she claimed I was. I was trapped. The meeting ended. No one would look me in the eye. The next morning, I was called into a meeting with my boss and a woman from HR. The room was cold. The HR woman had a practiced, sympathetic smile that didn't reach her eyes. They told me that, in light of the recent project outcome, they were restructuring the department. I was no longer a team lead. They were moving me to the platform sustenance team. It was a corporate graveyard, a place where they sent people they couldn't fire, but wanted to quit. My job would be to review and document old code from systems that were being phased out. It was a non-job, a professional prison sentence. My boss couldn't look at me. "I'm sorry, Hadley," he mumbled. "My hands are tied." I just nodded. I didn't have the energy to fight. The walk back to my desk was the longest walk of my life. The news had already spread. My team, my old team, was there. They were packing up my stuff for me, putting it in a cardboard box. An act of kindness that felt like the deepest cruelty. They didn't speak to me. They just averted their eyes as I picked up the box. Renata was there, talking to one of the other female devs. She glanced at me, a flicker of something in her eyes, pity or maybe triumph, and then turned away. I saw Michael at his desk. He was looking at his screen, headphones on, typing. It was as if I was already a ghost. The next few months were a gray fog. My new desk was in a forgotten corner of the building by a noisy air vent. I spent my days reading code that no one would ever use again. I ate lunch alone at my desk. I left at 5:01 p.m. on the dot. I had become Michael. I had plenty of time to think, to replay every decision, every meeting, every conversation. I saw my own arrogance, my own blindness. I saw how I had prized ideology over reality. I had been so convinced that I was fighting a war against male toxicity that I failed to see I was the one bringing the poison. I thought about Michael's warning in that first meeting. He hadn't been trying to tear Renata down. He had been trying to save the project. He had been trying to help. And I had publicly humiliated him for it. I had taught him, and every other man in that room, a valuable lesson. Your experience is worthless. Your opinion is not wanted. Your job is to shut up and do what you're told. They had learned the lesson well. They had learned it perfectly. They had given me exactly what I had asked for, a team of silent, compliant, unthinking drones. One afternoon, maybe 6 months after my fall from grace, I went to the main kitchen to get a coffee. It was a part of the building I usually avoided. As I was waiting for the machine, I heard voices from a nearby conference room. Not just voices. Laughter, an argument, an energetic, passionate debate. The door was open a crack. I glanced in. It was Cooper's team, the marketing tech guys. They were crowded around a large whiteboard, which was covered in frantic scribbles and diagrams. And in the center of it all, marker in hand, was Michael. He wasn't the ghost I knew. He was alive. His face was animated, energized. He was waving his arms, explaining a complex idea. No, that won't work, he said, laughing, as another developer challenged his point. You're forgetting about the caching layer. If we do that, we'll spend all day invalidating the cache. Another man, one of the other quiet ones from my old team, jumped in. What if we use a different cache-busting strategy? Push a notification through a message queue? Cooper, the manager, stood back, watching them with a smile. He wasn't directing. He was cultivating. They were a team. They were arguing, creating, challenging each other. They were forging something new in the fires of their debate. They were doing everything I had dreamed my team would do. I stood there, hidden in the doorway, my coffee forgotten. A cold, horrifying clarity washed over me. I had looked at men like Michael and seen a problem that needed to be fixed. I thought they were broken, defective. But they weren't broken. They were adaptive. They had adapted to the hostile environment I had created. Their silence, their passivity, their malicious compliance. It wasn't a flaw. It was a survival mechanism. It was the only rational response to a system designed to punish their initiative and silence their expertise. I hadn't been managing a team of broken men. I had been the one breaking them. I finally understood. They didn't break. We broke them.